All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining. We will get started in a few seconds. Just wanted to welcome you all and give some time for folks to join in. My name is David. I am a staff member here at the People's Forum. The People's Forum is a space for collective learning, visionary organizing, and building community amongst those committed to radically transforming the system that oppresses and marginalizes the vast majority of people throughout the world. This September, we are celebrating our 3rd anniversary of building working class consciousness and internationalism. During these trying times, we will continue to make every effort to make our political education and cultural offerings accessible and meaningful. We are extremely grateful to highlight 2 of our member organizations today, the Street Vendor Project and the Justice Committee. The Street Vendor Project is a membership-based project with more than 2,000 active vendor members who are working together to create a vendors movement for permanent change. And the Justice Committee is a grassroots organization dedicated to building a movement against police violence and systemic racism in New York City and empowering low-income Latinx and people of color to address these issues. We're here today to highlight the street vendors who make up a significant part of workforces in cities across the US and worldwide. In many countries, the majority of street vendors are women. During the past year, as the pandemic ravaged working class communities, the state provided little to no relief to poor and working class people. Many folks, particularly those who are undocumented, were excluded from this relief and had to resort to the informal economy, such as vending on the streets, as a means of survival. As businesses return, the street vendors are going to be under attack. And so we wanted to highlight the work that the Street Vendors Project is doing currently to organize this community, and also to provide a space for the Justice Committee to conduct a training so that folks who may not be on the streets vending, but are in community with these folks can help and be in solidarity. So we will now pass it on to the Street Vendors Project. We'll go on to Eric to lead us off. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate the People's Forum for providing us all with this platform today. It's amazing. Also want to thank folks that are tuning in and showing up for street vendors today. It's not been an easy year for anyone, but street vendors in particular have had a lot to deal with. Transitioning from their previous employment, right, their jobs that provided them with a steady income, to a more volatile, less stable economic sector with little to no support from government agencies. Can be very intimidating, frustrating, and just straight up dangerous in the midst of a pandemic. Street vendors have been on the front line, exposed to COVID-19 and providing those essential services, whether it was food, right, or products, including masks, right? Early on in the pandemic, there was a shortage of masks, and street vendors were there to provide that kind of product. But they've also been on the front line fighting to make sure that workers have dignity and demonstrating that street vendors are organized and that street vendors are powerful. Earlier on in the year, we won a legislation here in the city of New York for the Intro 1116, which our own Sonia Perez will speak about later. But we also were part of the Fund for Excluded Workers campaign, which managed to acquire a fund for workers that were effectively excluded from unemployment insurance and many other programs that others had access to during the pandemic. And so right now we're actually in the midst of the implementation of both of those victories, the Intro 1116 and the Fund for Excluded Workers. So I want to really, I'm not going to take up too much of our time because I really want to get to the other speakers, Helen Guzman and Victoria Toro and Sonia Perez. But I want to provide a really quickly an update or some context to our campaign, the moratorium that we're asking from the city to implement. Okay, so we kicked off our campaign earlier this summer, June 16th, actually, for a moratorium. The idea is that we want the city to implement a moratorium on street vendor fines, specifically fines that are related to lack of permitting or licensing. And this initiative came about because of our suspicion that street vending would be targeted by city agencies once the economy was to be reopened in July of this year. Fast forward from June when we kicked it off to mid-July, and our suspicions were confirmed after having excluded street vending from the plan to reopen the economy. Mayor Bill de Blasio actually deployed at the request of certain Bronx bids, the NYPD, along with the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection, DCWP, with the intent of dispersing Fordham Road street vendors. This was, I believe, July maybe 16th or 15th even. And this move actually went against an announcement which Mayor de Blasio made last year in June, which was part of the sort of police reforms that he was introducing, no doubt, and due in large part to the movement for Black Lives, which we saw really, you know, uh, increase last summer. But last year, as part of those police reforms, Mayor Bill de Blasio suggested that, or that we get NYPD out of uh, enforcement of street vending rules and regulation. But that was he. It seems that he's backtracking, or he backtracked at least briefly from that, and the fact that NYPD was collaborating with a civilian agency like DCWP was really unfair, is what we thought. And so, throughout the month of August, we have held a series of street vendor resource fairs throughout the city, in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, in Queens, and the Bronx. And these fairs have allowed us to build bases in strategic neighborhoods where bids have a stronghold, right? Where there's commercial corridors, where brick and mortars are, but also big box stores. We were also able to build relationships with some elected officials, and we even got to meet some of our opposition in these neighborhoods. And so our demand for a moratorium really is a short-term solution to a much bigger issue, namely the issue of the antiquated street vending system itself. So earlier this year, we won, as I said earlier, we won a campaign to increase the number of mobile food vending permits by 4,000 um, mobile food vending permits. That does not include general merchandising. And now we're going to actually get to hear from our own member and leadership board member, Sonia Perez. She will be talking about this Intro 1116. She'll provide you with some details of that struggle and how we won it and what is left to be done moving forward. Compañera Sonia Perez, la acabo de introducir,
Okay.
and I'll be interpreting for her. So she'll speak in Spanish and I'll interpret to
Ok. Bueno, como ya saben, mi nombre es Sonia Pérez. Soy parte del proyecto de vendedores ambulantes y de la junta directiva. Bueno, voy a decir un poco de qué es la organización, qué es un apoyo. La organización es un apoyo para corregir la injusticia social y económica que enfrentamos la comunidad vendedora en la calle. y también hace concientizar sobre los derechos legales del trabajo.
So, as you all know, my name is Sonia Perez. I'm a leadership board member. I've been a longtime member of the organization. And very briefly, the SVP is an organization that provides very important support to the street vending community and provides a lot of information and education to the street vendors. Siga, compañera.
O sea, como grupo o organización hemos dado un paso después de 30 años. Estar bloqueado el sistema de la venta ambulante. Dimos un paso pequeño, pero muy importante para desbloquear este tipo de injusticias que nos enfrentamos la comunidad vendedora.
As an organization, we have made a small step forward with Intro 1116, and we hope to continue to advance that work.
Ok, la Intro 1116 se refiere a la venta ambulante de comida solamente. Específicamente para este tipo de venta ha sido una lucha constante para lograr llegar haciendo juntas comunitarias con concejales y políticos que nos han apoyado como parte de la comunidad y la ciudad.
So, as mentioned a moment ago, the Intro 1116 is a piece of legislation that only focused on food vending permits. And it's been very crucial to build relationships with several elected officials to help us pass that legislation. And it's also been very helpful to build in our communities the power to pass that legislation.
Ok, esta gente ha sido siempre trabajadora, en el cual somos pequeñas empresas, inmigrantes, y yo creo que siempre empezamos con un pequeño paso para ser grandes en nuestros sueños o propósitos de vida. Y la ley...
As you all know, the immigrant community is a very hardworking community, and this was an important step towards giving further support to that community.
Ok, esta ley 1116 se ganó en enero 28 de 2020 y se va a implementar en el 2022 los permisos. Esta ley también igualmente se ha creado una junta asesora llamada Junta Supervisora.
So this legislation, Intro 1116, was won in early 2021, and it went into effect in January. However, the actual benefits of this legislation will not be seen until the year 2022. One aspect of this legislation also includes a supervisory board.
Ok, este grupo de personas se encargará de cumplir las legislaciones sobre la venta ambulante y dará recomendaciones al Consejo Municipal y al alcalde de la ciudad sobre temas de la venta ambulante.
The role of the supervisory board is to help provide or give some recommendations to the mayor and to the other agencies involved in the implementation of Intro 1116.
Esta junta estará integrada por algunos miembros de los vendedores y dueños de edificios y organizaciones comunitarias, al igual que habrá miembros del gobierno municipal. En total serán 15 integrantes en este grupo.
So the supervisory board will be made up of several stakeholders from street vendors to ally organizations, but also business owners from like real estate and other large sectors of the economy. In total, there will be 15 members of the supervisory board.
Y esto quiere decir que la clave de esta legislación aprobada se refiere a que el portador de este permiso debería estar presente junto a su carro o puesto de venta.
One of the most important aspects of this piece of legislation, which is different than the previous permits from the older system, is that the owner, the permit owner of these new permits that are being distributed through Intro 1116 will have to be present at all times when vending on the street. This is not the case for owners of the older permits.
Con esto se intenta impedir a los proveedores de un permiso que puedan rentar estos permisos que son muy exagerados, la renta por año.
The idea behind this reform in the legislation, I'm sorry, in the street vending system is that it will help undermine the informal or black market because currently the older system allowed for permit owners to rent their permits with at absurd prices for the worker of the cart, which led to exploitation.
Ok, después de todo eso hemos luchado también hemos sometido una propuesta al Senado llamada 1175 que legislaría y despenalizaría la venta ambulante en todo el estado.
After having won Intro 1116, we're at a point where we have recently introduced another piece of legislation at the state level, S 1175 or A 5081. These legislations would effectively legalize street vending and would also decriminalize street vending.
Esto será una solución a largo plazo, proporcionando un camino a su propio negocio. Y que es una de las fuerzas más importantes en el ámbito local.
Compañera, ¿puede repetir eso?
Ok. Esto será una solución a largo plazo. Proporcionaría un camino a su propio negocio y que es una fuerza bien importante en el ámbito laboral, siendo la gente más marginada por no tener un estatus legal y siendo madres solteras o padres por igual situación, siendo mujeres de color.
Great. Unlike our campaign for a moratorium and Intro 1116, we are suggesting that the state level legislation, S 1175, will be a longer term solution to the issue that we were facing, or the old street vending system. And being that street vendors tend to be some of the most marginalized communities in society, made up of women, of single parents, of immigrants, this would be an amazing step forward for our communities.
O sea, como un vendedor es la única opción que tenemos para sacar a nuestras familias adelante. La venta ambulante es muy importante porque nos permite ser auténticos y no dejamos morir nuestras tradiciones, ya sea en nuestras cocinas, trayendo nuestras recetas de nuestros abuelitos y nuestras raíces indígenas. Y la cultura en música, danzas y demostrar que somos diversos en este país.
Sometimes street vending is one of the few forms of employment that some of us have been able to find in this society, and but more importantly, it really what it helps us, whether it's with through the kitchen with our recipes. It helps us preserve our indigenous roots for some of us, and also with when it comes to music. All in all, really, it's doing is contributing to the social fabric of the society and its multiculturalism.
Bueno, y por último les diré que yo siempre he pensado que es un gran país o una gran ciudad tan grande y que está hecho por inmigrantes. Y no poder ver un carrito de hot dog sería una ciudad muerta y no llamativa para los turistas. Lo más delicioso es encontrar en la calle un carro de comida a cualquier hora y económico.
Well, I've always thought, right, that this city is a great city, and part of it, what it makes it great, really, is it's the street vending culture, and it would be a terribly sad day when we can no longer see street vending making being a important part of the culture of this city. Muchas gracias, compañera Sonia. Muchas gracias.
Okay.
Estamos justo a tiempo, compañeros. So I was making a comment that we're right on time. We actually were hoping that maybe we can take some questions if any questions are popping up on the YouTube feed or on Facebook or wherever. Do let us know if you have any questions specific to like the campaign, how we organize, maybe any details. I'm sure that most folks don't always know all the ins and outs of the street vending community, and but if you have any questions, please let us know. Okay, so I see David shared a couple. Okay, I'm gonna read them out loud, and then I'll also interpret them to Spanish for Sonia in case she wants to answer any of these. Are there organizations of street vendors in other cities like LA or Chicago that you all are connecting with? Is there movement to make this a nationwide fight? And what are ways that the street vendor community has supported each other during this pandemic? Awesome questions. Voy a traducirlas, compañera. La primera pregunta es, ¿hay organizaciones de vendedores ambulantes en otras ciudades como Los Ángeles o Chicago y con las que estamos conectándonos? Y la otra es, ¿hay alguna intención o un movimiento para hacer esta lucha de los vendedores ambulantes, llevarla al nivel nacional? Y la tercera pregunta es, ¿De qué maneras se han apoyado los compañeros vendedores ambulantes durante la pandemia? Compañera Sonia, ¿quiere responder alguna de esas 3 preguntas? Y yo puedo también apoyar.
Bueno, nos hemos apoyado, sí, con organizaciones durante la pandemia. Sí, nos han apoyado mucho a los vendedores. No vamos, la de Robinson Hood, que nos apoyó. La coalición también que hemos ganado como dijiste al principio, una lucha que hemos logrado para que se llama Trabajadores Excluidos, en el cual nunca hemos tenido o nunca tuvimos durante la pandemia un alivio económico por parte del gobierno. ¿Por qué? Porque somos gente migrante. Por no tener un estatus legal, es por eso que no nos apoyó el gobierno. Pero en la lucha unimos fuerzas con otras organizaciones para ganar este trabajo que llamamos trabajadores excluidos. Se ha ganado un monto, la verdad no les puedo decir los números, no estoy exactamente cuánto se ha ganado para toda la gente que está al alcance de calificar para ese fondo y ayudarlos a restablecer un poco la economía, que fuimos afectados muchos por la pandemia. Yo fui una de ellas, en el cual también me enfermé, me dio el coronavirus y sí, el proyecto de vendedores ha hecho todo lo posible de alcanzar el apoyo de diferentes organizaciones para apoyar a su gente, a toda la que tiene como membresía general o no miembros, simplemente ser un vendedor. Hemos apoyado también a la gente que no ha sido miembro, solamente por ser un vendedor en la calle hemos apoyado y pues nada, y seguimos en la lucha. Yo creo que uniendo fuerzas, ya sea como dice un lema, ¿verdad? O una canción que tenemos, de norte a sur, de este a oeste, ganaremos esta batalla, cueste lo que cueste.
Voy a tratar de interpretar lo que acaba de comentar, compañera. Sonia was mentioning that sure, there's definitely been ways that we've been supporting each other as street vendors. For starters, there was the cash assistance program that we were able to have through the Robin Hood Foundation. What we did was that we were able to obtain some money to help distribute to some of the street vendors, but also we through the fight, through the coalition for the Fund Excluded Workers campaign, we were able to recently win and are now implementing the application process for that. And I'd like to add, this is Eric talking, that we also had mutual aid. So we were also providing opportunities for food distribution, but also for opportunities for some of our street vendors to provide meals and then distribute them in their neighborhoods. And we would provide we would compensate them for the food that was being provided. But then I'll continue to interpret. The other section was that that we will continue to fight. There's a saying, or there's a chant that we say in Spanish, from east to west, north to south. We'll keep on fighting no matter what the cost is. That's roughly the translation. And then I would like to. There's another question that I see here. It says, ¿tenéis contabilizados cuántos vendedores ambulantes hay en la ciudad de Nueva York y concretamente en el Midtown Downtown? The question is asking if we know how many street vendors there are in the city of New York, or specifically in Midtown Downtown. ¿Puedo contestar esa pregunta, compañera?
Sí, claro.
Listo. So, from before the pandemic, before the COVID-19, we had I don't want to say any number that will be wrong, but there's definitely been increase because of the fact that people have been left unemployed by their. Don't have a number for Midtown or for citywide right now during the pandemic, but we had estimated 20,000 pre-pandemic. I'd like to also try to answer some of the other questions that were made early on. I missed this other question. It says, "What are the biggest challenges that you face as a street vendor daily?" And I'll translate this. I'll interpret this one for Sonia so that she can give it a shot. I'm sure she has a lot to say about that. Um, Compañera Sonia, aquí hay una pregunta que dice, ¿cuáles son los obstáculos más grandes, más difíciles que un vendedor ambulante, con lo que un vendedor ambulante lidia cada día?
¿Yo contesto? ¿Puedo contestar?
Sí, claro, compañera, sí, yo la interpreté para que usted la contestara porque yo no, ahí
Ok,
sí no
bueno,
sé.
los obstáculos que como un vendedor en la calle, hemos sido muy marginados. Piensan que porque nosotros, la mayoría de gente es inmigrante y somos mujeres, somos acosados por todo tipo de personas y específicamente por las autoridades, más por la policía nos acosan mucho, nos mueven de nuestros espacios donde ya tenemos por años trabajando. Es bien frustrante lidiar con las autoridades que no te dan la oportunidad de trabajar. Ponen tickets, nos tiran nuestras cosas. A veces hasta han sido arrestados nuestros compañeros y ha sido bien difícil el trabajo de un vendedor en la calle porque nos enfrentamos a todo tipo de obstáculos con autoridades, con gente a veces también de la comunidad, con gente de la calle, pero yo digo que tenemos que llegar a un acuerdo, tenemos que lidiar con todo eso y llegar hacia las autoridades correspondientes, donde ellos pueden ser un cambio a nuestras políticas, que todas las políticas están muy quebradas y tenemos que hacer un cambio para que nosotros también tengamos la voz y el poder de decir que unidos sí se puede lograr el cambio para lo que nosotros queremos.
Muchas gracias, compañera. Voy a intentar interpretar lo que acaba de comentar.
Sí.
So, there are several obstacles, but probably the most difficult ones are dealing with city agencies and whether it's Department of Sanitation, now Department of Consumer and Worker Protection, or the police. Usually they're always moving us from our spots, or in the worst cases, worst instances, they will take our stuff away or throw it in the garbage into the dumpster trucks from the Department of Sanitation. And in some instances, they've also arrested some of our comrades. for working. But we also have to deal with just regular social dynamics that in the neighborhoods, whether it's from people in our own communities or from other individuals. But ultimately, we do have to try hard to do outreach and bring awareness to the street vendors, because we need a change, and it's only us that can make that change happen. Um, so, okay, compañeros. So we have 2 minutes left, and these questions are really good, and I feel like they're going to require some time to address. What are the challenges and opportunities for organizing in the street vendor community? That's such a great question. I'm gonna just be brief. One of them is, I guess, language. That requires a lot of time. In our own organization, the largest group is Spanish speaker, but if you take a walk around the city, um, and I'll repeat that because my internet is failing. If you take a walk around the city, you'll notice that there are street vendors from all walks of life, from East Asia to Southeast Asia, from Africa, and so that's an issue. Another obstacle, I believe, is the fact that there's the schism between worker ownership, right? Either you're an entrepreneur and a worker both at the same time, and sometimes that could present its own sort of set of difficulties when organizing what with street vendors. Um, but I want to pass it over to the Justice Committee. Um, but before doing so, I want to share a quick link here on the with you all, if it hasn't been shared already. Um, and I'm sharing it now on the Zoom chat, and then David can share it with folks on YouTube. If anyone's interested in continuing to follow up with us, if you're a member of an organization, if you have if you hold a, a position within an organization and you're interested in continuing to support and protect street vendors, please fill out this survey for us, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as we can. Really appreciate you all. And right now, we're going to pass it over to the Justice Committee. Um, they will provide sort of this concrete way for supporting street vendors. If you ever have the chance of observing an interaction between an agency and street vendors, as a government agency and street vendors.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks so much, Sonia. Learned a lot and really appreciate everything that you all shared, and also People's Forum for having us. Hello, everyone. My name is Helen, and I'm an organizer with the Justice Committee. Like I shared, like was shared earlier, the Justice Committee is an organization, a grassroots organization that supports and organizes families who've lost loved ones to police violence, and engages our community in holding the police accountable and develop community safety alternatives that decrease reliance on law enforcement. So thanks all for joining the Street Vendor Solidarity webinar and for sticking around to hear an introduction to Justice Committee's CopWatch. This is meant to be an inclusive space with the exception of law enforcement. So any law enforcement, we ask that you leave immediately. If there are any reporters, also we are asking you to take quotes from this training or from this introduction, introductory to our CopWatch. And if you would like to set up an interview with one of the trainers, please email yulsan@justicecommittee.org. So just to be clear again, this is not actually a full training, our full CopWatch training. Our full training is usually 2 hours long and a lot more interactive. So we want to but however, we still wanted to take the opportunity to join this presentation and share a few tips on cop watching, since we do understand the conditions right now that street vendors are working under, impacted by COVID-19 and other strains. The impact has been that it has exacerbated income inequality and created new conditions for police violence against low-income communities of color. So we are joining you all to introduce these tips for cop watching to make sure that you have some understanding to be able to keep your community safe from police brutality, and your community includes New York City street vendors. So we will go through guidelines and best practices for filming the police under our current conditions, and to do that as safe and effective as possible while you're cop watching. So you can feel free to use wherever you're connected to this training, to submit any questions via the chat, and we'll do our best to go over any questions. However, we have a very limited amount of time, and you can always follow up with us via email as well. So really quickly, what is CopWatch? That is generally a question that I would love to hear what your thoughts are. Feel free to add it in the chats where you are and just sort of pile that on. But I can go ahead and just and share. So CopWatch is simply the legal and constitutionally protected practice of monitoring and documenting police activity in order to deter, de-escalate, and expose police abuse and misconduct. It can be practiced in formal teams with schedules to patrol specific neighborhoods. The first organization that practiced CopWatch in a formal manner were the Black Panthers in the 70s to deal with police harassment in Black communities in California. At that time, it was legal to carry guns in plain view in California. The practice has later became known as CopWatch. Today, instead of guns, we use our video cameras or our cell phones to document police activity. So CopWatch can also be practiced individually and spontaneously. If you stop to watch the police when you see them taking action against another person, you are cop watching, even if you don't feel comfortable filming them. This is something we encourage all New Yorkers to do. It's one way that we can watch out for one another and build safer, more empowered communities. We know that cop watch teams are not going to be present at every moment when police violence could potentially occur. So we do need all New Yorkers to become cop watchers in their everyday lives. This is what we called building a culture of cop watch in New York City. In New York City, organizations have been practicing CopWatch and training New Yorkers to do this since the 90s. Looking to the legacy of the Black Panthers, or of the Panthers, a group called the Black Panther Collective ran CopWatch patrols in Harlem and Washington Heights in the 90s. The Black Panther Collective trained the Malcolm X grassroots movement, who trained the Justice Committee, who trained many of the organizations in our coalition, Communities United for Police Reform. So this curriculum is very abbreviated and was developed by the Justice Committee based on MXGM's materials and drawing lessons from that long legacy. So again, just to be clear, this isn't our full CopWatch training, but an introduction and some tips so that you can do your best at CopWatch and remain disciplined in protecting your community members, which include our New York City street vendors. So you can actually stay on this slide. And I'll pass it over to
Hey everyone, my name is Victoria and I'm a member of the Justice Committee. I organize with JC to help build out community safety alternatives and to promote our budget justice campaign to cut the NYPD's budget by at least $1 billion and see that money go towards health and mental health services in our communities instead. So just as an introduction, we wanted to start by posing this question, which is, what is police violence? What comes to your mind when asked this question? And you know, while you ruminate on that, and feel free to add it in your various chats, I think some key points to think about are that while we often think of police violence as beatings or killings, this sort of violence can take many forms, and interactions that may look harmless from a distance can absolutely still be violence, and that these situations at any time can also easily escalate. Therefore, it's important to monitor and document anytime you see police taking action against someone. For example, a street stop, a car stop, a frisk, or an investigation, or ask for permitting of a street vendor, for example. You know, the sorts of folks who tend to be more impacted are people of color, homeless folks, LGBT folks, Muslim communities, or people who are perceived to be Muslim or Arab American, poor and working class folks, people with disabilities, immigrants, youth, etc. And obviously, while there are certain people impacted, there are also certain entities that benefit. For example, you know, the government and those with power and privilege. And it's also important to note that while some forms of police violence are illegal, which means that cops are breaking the law, many forms of police violence are fully sanctioned and legal. This means that on top of cop watching, there's a lot of work that we need to do to truly end police violence. This sort of violence is nothing new, but the pandemic has certainly created new conditions for abuse. And we saw especially Black and Latinx communities being disproportionately impacted by the police department's social distancing enforcement and permitting enforcement. On top of this, their aggressive enforcement of low-level quality of life offenses, for example, broken windows policing and other forms of over-policing can contribute to the spread of coronavirus by putting officers into close contact with New Yorkers, cycling people through unsanitary precincts, courts, and jail systems. We've also seen recently, but also throughout history, high levels of police violence against protesters. For these reasons, it's essential that we monitor and document police activity to deter, de-escalate, and to expose abuse. So again, it's just more important than ever that as many New Yorkers as possible are trained and committed to cop watching whenever possible. We also want to address the, again, this slide is typically talking about who is impacted versus who benefits. And I think we can go on to the next slide, which is primarily about, thank you so much, primarily about white privilege and policing and white folks in cop watching. And for any allies that are watching this, you know, we want to address that white folks absolutely are conditioned to see cops as safe and helpful. And it's great to acknowledge that this is not the case for most people of color, especially Black and Latinx folks. And understanding this informs how we cop watch. You know, definitely we want to acknowledge that white people do experience police violence, but they are not systematically targeted by police based on their race. And that Black, Indigenous, and other people of color get stopped by the police every day for things that white people do freely, such as jaywalking, or for simply existing in public, like getting targeted while driving or walking down the street for no other reason than their race. And that we want to keep in mind that, you know, if you are cop watching, and you are a white ally, it is your responsibility as someone with privilege to not escalate a situation between the police and a community member who may be targeted and be more susceptible to that violence. So keep that in mind as you observe this training. And I'll pass it off to Helen.
All right, so a quick note about knowing your rights. As a cop watcher, it's super important for you to know your rights. We don't have time to go over all of these. So we do encourage everyone to attend a full Know Your Rights training as soon as possible. And you can review the Know Your Rights information on Community United for Police Reform's website, which I can add to the chat. And, you know, it's so important for us all to remember that we all have rights, citizens and non-citizens. But what we are actually seeing right now with street vendors is that street vendors do not have these protections, the same protections that we do. Police are legally stopping and searching them, asking them for their identification for compliance purposes, and the ways that we heard Sonia speak about. So definitely there's a lot of work to be done in that regard. However, you as a cop watcher have the right to observe and document police activity, and you have the right to document the police on the street and subways, as long as you're not keeping officers from doing their job or obstructing the functioning of the MTA. You also cannot film with ancillary equipment, which means anything like a tripod or an external light or mic. Cop watching is legal and constitutionally protected. However, it does come with an elevated risk of arrest because law enforcement often does not want to be monitored. It's important to assess your own vulnerabilities. So we can also share some links here with more information about risks and concerns if you are not a U.S. citizen and want to take action and CopWatch for your community members.
Thanks, Helen. So when we talk about cop watching, we like to talk about the 3 Ds, which is deter, de-escalate, and document, obviously. But in this day and age of COVID, we also like to add a bonus D, which is distance, right? You know, especially now as case counts surge across the country. And because we know that the interaction with the police, who are often not wearing masks, elevates our risk of infection, it's important to keep our distance from officers and the community members that they are targeting. As for the first 3 Ds, definitely you should, if possible, engage in CopWatch anytime you see police taking action against someone, because as we've already discussed, even police interactions that are not physically brutal can be violent, and non-violent situations can escalate easily, such as in the case of Eric Garner. So ideally, by CopWatching, we deter violence before it starts, and we de-escalate it if it's already happening, by documenting it. But if we cannot de-escalate successfully, we can at least document the abuse that's occurring. What you're trying to do by cop watching is care for your community, minimize police violence as much as possible in the moment that it's happening, and gather evidence of misconduct and abuse. It's important to, you know, you're not trying to become a superhero or make a statement or get arrested. You're trying to help the safety of the person being targeted. It's not about you, it's about keeping your community members safe. And I'll pass it off to Helen.
Great. Next slide, please. All right, so now I'm going to share some guidelines for staying safe or staying safer while you're cop watching. So first and foremost, it's still important to practice some social distancing and not get closer than 6 feet to officers that you are monitoring or community members that you're trying to support. So if you're not sure what 6 feet is, just think of a car's length between you and the incident. Next slide. So also equally important is, you know, your assessment of the situation. So cop watching is legal, including during a pandemic. However, you know, we discussed about how when you do cop watch, there is an elevated risk of arrest or being targeted by cops in some other way. So as Victoria had shared, the goals of CopWatch are to deter, de-escalate, and document, not to make a political statement by getting arrested. So you always want to assess your risk. You know, know your immigration citizenship status, know whether or not you have an open case, whether or not you're on parole or on probation, if you're carrying any weapons or contraband. Also, you know, mentally and emotionally, are you feeling even-tempered and focused? What will the consequences be if you are arrested? So those are just questions that you can ask to help assess your risk. Questions that you can ask to help assess the conditions are, you know, who are you with? Perhaps you were out walking your pet, or maybe you're, you know, hanging out with your brother, a younger brother or a younger sibling, or maybe you're with someone who also does CopWatch. So you wanna be aware of who you're with and who else is around you, which other people are around, and are other people paying attention and observing. You also want to know how hostile the cops are, so to best make the situation of how you're gonna, whether or not you're gonna be cop watching and how. So, which of course we encourage you to cop watch. So yeah, so next slide, please. So what you want to decide is whether or not you feel safe enough to film, right? So you want cops and the community person to know whether or not you want the cops to know whether you're watching them, how close you want to be, that you feel comfortable and safe getting to this, you know, as close as you feel comfortable, and getting to the incident while maintaining a car's length away. Also important is to keep in mind that every situation is going to be different from location. You know, you could be on the subway, or you could be on a bus, or you could be on the street, right? So there are certain key things that you should always do, like assess, and you have to be making those choices based on all those conditions. Of course, next slide, please. We ask you to always, you know, call a friend, let them know where you are and that you're cop watching, text or call them when the incident is over. That way someone will know if you're arrested. Yeah.
And with that, we want to make sure that you, if the police interact with you, if, for example, police ask you for your ID, use your judgment, and you are within your right to not show your ID, especially since showing ID could bring you into closer contact with officers. However, the reality is that cops frequently detain or arrest folks who choose to assert this right. So your goal is, again, not to be arrested so that you can continue to document the incident. So if asked for ID, try to keep your camera running during this interaction. And if you decide to show it your ID, keep your distance as much as possible. And, you know, feel free to narrate by saying, I will give you my ID, but I'd like to keep as much distance between us as possible to protect us both from COVID-19 infection. And, you know, if they take it and give it back to you, definitely, you know, if you have disinfecting wipes or something like that, wipe down your ID before taking it back and wash your hands as possible. And obviously, you know, don't touch your face before sanitizing your hands if possible. And as this slide illustrates, when filming in the subway, you know, keep in mind that, you know, again, you want to maintain 6 feet of distance, and that you are, if you are in the subway using ancillary equipment like professional lights or microphones or tripods without getting a permit to use in the subway is not allowed. So you can get a ticket for that and then be the subject or the target of a police interaction if you have any of that equipment. So keep it simple, keep it to your smartphone. And next slide, please. Thank you. And feel free to debrief if necessary. Sometimes even it's sometimes even more difficult to observe abuse and harassment on your own because you can offer the person being targeted less support and you don't have your team to back you up. So, you know, feel free to call someone from your organization or just a friend and talk through what you witnessed. And be easy on yourself, because observing the police is really not an easy thing to do. And if you're in a tense situation, be vigilant of your mental and physical health, especially, during this pandemic. So if you don't feel like you can pull out your camera, just stopping to watch is better than not stopping at all. And definitely keep in mind that you want to comply if the police, tell you to move back. And that especially if you feel like you cannot risk arrest. And also, obviously, if police ever point a weapon at you, comply and move back to a safe distance. And with that, I'll pass it off to Helen for the next slide.
Thanks, Victoria. So now some guidelines for communicating with community members or the people that the police are targeting. So it's important that when you're approaching the incident that you remain calm. As soon as you approach, you want to check the lapel of the officers to see what precinct they're coming from or command. And if you feel like it won't escalate the situation, you can explain to the person or the people that are being targeted that you are just watching and documenting to make sure that the cops do not become abusive. You can say something along the lines of, I am just going to stand here from over 6 feet away and watch to make sure the cops don't become violent. Next slide, please. If the police don't approach you and don't seem to mind your presence, you can continue and ask the person or the people that are being targeted if they are okay and if they know why they're being stopped. They may answer, they also may not for many reasons. Perhaps they're afraid, or the police is intimidating them. The police may tell them to be quiet, or they don't understand, etc. So don't take things personally and don't push. But if it seems appropriate and safe, ask if they want you to call someone for them, and get a phone number so that you can make the call. Next slide, please. So if the person the person who's being targeted by police asks you to stop filming, you want to do your best to continue filming. You also want to reassure them that you're just filming the police to make sure that they're okay. So you want to use your judgment. If a community member is experiencing an emotional crisis or your presence seems to be escalating the situation, you may want to stop filming or move further away from the incident. However, never leave the incident. And I'll pass it over to Victoria to talk about what to do if the police do approach you.
Yes, so again, if the police do approach you or choose to interact with you, you can definitely say that and narrate, remember that you are filming in this situation, right? Say that I'm not obstructing you in any way. I am only exercising my legal right to observe the police while you are doing your job. I am over 6 feet away. I am practicing social distancing. And if the police challenge you and say that you do not have the right to observe or film, confidently repeat those phrases because you absolutely do have that right. And even if you feel like you have to put the camera down to not escalate the situation, definitely, again, use your judgment on that, but try your best not to turn it off. Again, this is because you want a full documentation of the incident for future reference. Next slide, please. And if the police tell you to get back, say that you are complying and that you will step back, and then take one step back. And then, definitely, again, narrate that, I am cooperating, I have stepped back, I am not trying to stop you from doing your job, I am exercising my legal right to observe the police, and I'm over 6 feet away. Just, the basic tenets of what you have in your mind of the rules that you should be following to keep yourself safe, feel free to say that out loud, again, as narration for documentation purposes. And if the police continue to tell you to step back, again, each time they ask, just continue to take one step back while repeating this response, and that you are complying and that you are not interfering with them doing their job. but just make sure that you do your best, again, as long as you're not escalating the situation, to not allow the police to make you leave the scene or push you back so far that you can no longer see or document what's actually happening. You do have the right to observe from a reasonable distance. So you should absolutely exercise that right as long as you are not escalating a situation.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick note going back to the point about, if community members, ask you not to film or like aren't comfortable. That's definitely happened to me in the past, and I definitely used that guideline of sharing that I'm just filming the cops and I'm doing this so that the cops don't get more aggressive with them. And I think that definitely I stayed till the end of that incident. And the young person, he was a young black man on the subway who was stopped by several cops for hopping turnstile, or actually I didn't actually see that. That was what the cops were saying. However, he was, he expressed being very grateful for, staying the entire time, and asked for his recording, which we were able to share. I was able to share after the incident. So definitely encourage that, that it's a process of, it's a good thing fundamentally. So moving on to this slide, so some guidelines for effective monitoring and documenting. So you want to always wear your CopWatch hat, have your phone ready or camera ready. You want to also do a good job of monitoring police presence in your neighborhood, know where they set up shop, what times they're in the subways, what times they're on your block, and locations where street vendors are, right? What time do they come by to harass folks, and everywhere that there's likely to be police activity. So next slide, please. You also want to make sure that you document key information so that you record the date, the time, and the location, and any identifying information about the police. So you want to say this into the camera or take notes if you're not filming because you've assessed that you're not comfortable and it doesn't feel safe to do so. So you want to describe any police misconduct that you're seeing, such as excessive force. Next slide. So we want folks to also, to effectively document. And so you want to see the full shot, try to get the full bodies of the cops and the people they are targeting in your frame. So we know that landscape horizontal is best when you're using your cell phone. So you also want to keep your phone or camera ready, make sure that it's charged and that there's enough storage space on it. Next slide. So in the case that someone is arrested and you feel like it's not going to escalate the situation, you do want to ask someone if you can call someone for them, get a phone number and make the call. If you feel like you can't support them, just beyond just documenting, ask their legal name so you can help track them through the system. And I think that we can go over to the next slide. So some guidelines for posting, right? So the Justice Committee, you can always send CopWatch footage to the Justice Committee if you CopWatched and you saw any police abuse, excessive use of force. You can email the information of the video to info@justicecommittee.org or send it via WhatsApp to 347-752-8070 or via Dropbox to the email. So, if you want to discuss how the best way to send your footage, you can always call the same number to discuss with us. And perhaps you can also send it to Eric at Street Vendor Project if it's specifically you're cop watching for street vendors. But I'll let him share some information later on about that. And just a reminder that cop watching is about exposing police misconduct. So in cases of clear misconduct and excessive force, it is important to get the footage out there. However, when you post footage, you have to keep in mind that the purpose is to support victims and survivors of police violence or their misconduct. So some things that you need to consider before posting any footage publicly is whether or not you have consent from the person that you're trying to help, from themselves, from that person specifically, or from their family or friends. And in many cases, it's not actually possible to get consent. For example, if the person's being targeted is alone, or they are taken into custody. So, however, if it's possible to get their permission to post the footage publicly, do so. And so the other question that you want to, keep in mind is that sometimes you could potentially harm the person that you're trying to help or other community members by posting the footage. For example, if your footage appears to show a community member breaking the law or making the footage public, could further criminalize them. And even ICE could potentially use footage to locate someone they're looking for. So so you want to be careful what you're putting out there. So definitely it's a huge responsibility, and you can always reach out to us to discuss this. Yeah, I'm gonna pass it now to Victoria.
So we'll take this breather for a second to pause and ask if anyone has any questions about anything that we've spoken about during this very, very short presentation. And feel free to enter any of those into the various chats that you have that you're watching this on. But other than that, we just want to kind of summarize our key points, right? If you're a cop watcher and you're an ally, be aware of your privileges while you're cop watching. Our 3 Ds, which are deter, de-escalate, and document, plus, pandemic safe distance, 6 feet, the length of a car. And assess the situation, case by case basis, be flexible. Don't interact with police officers unless they interact with you. Record and document key information, while keeping in mind that CopWatch is essentially about loving your community. So if you feel like at any point you are not helping a community member by your actions, or that you are escalating a situation, like, feel free to reevaluate your situation. And definitely attend Know Your Rights training from CPR, or a full JC CopWatch training in the future. Hopefully we will be holding more full 2-hour trainings soon. Helen, anything else?
Yeah, I think that last thing, I'm gonna put this in the chat. We're having our community defense meeting next Monday. You can always check us out. I'll drop this in the chat, our membership form. Our meetings are open to Justice Committee members. So check us out, and maybe you can come to the next community defense meeting. But yeah, are there any questions that popped up in the chat?
Alrighty, so thank you, Helen and Victoria, so much for that CopWatch training. And Eric and Sonia, thank you so much for bringing in the perspective of the street vendor community. We want to continue highlighting the struggles and the responses of communities that are marginalized, that are oppressed, that are poor. And the struggle is not just of street vendors or of folks in New York City. but this is a struggle that the working class in the US and across the world is facing. And so we want to thank everyone for joining today. Really looking forward to hearing more about the campaigns that you all are running and how this is going to build moving forward. So we hope to see you all again, and thank you all so much for joining.